Story of how not always a younger brother becomes the golden child. Family dynamics can be complicated, but mine? Well, mine is something else entirely. You know how they say younger siblings get spoiled? Yeah, I wish. In my family, everything good, everything worth having, was meant for my older brother, Kirill, 3 years older, yet somehow that tiny age gap felt like an unbridgeable chasm when it came to how we were treated. For as long as I can remember, my parents only seemed to have eyes for Kirill. They praised his every move like he was the second coming of Einstein, while I was barely more than a shadow trailing behind. My parents adored him. No, they worshipped him. And I was the oops baby, the one who wasn't part of the original plan. That kind of thing leaves a mark, you know? The first time I truly understood the depth of their favoritism was during a seemingly innocent moment. Kirill had just won first place in the school's social studies Olympiad. My mom was on cloud nine, calling every relative and grandparent within a 50-mile radius. We had a huge party, cake, presents, the works. When I, on the other hand, came in second in the city physics competition a few years later, my mom barely raised an eyebrow. Instead of congratulations, all I got was the cold, stinging question. Why didn't you come first? That pretty much set the tone for everything between Kirill and me. He thrived under their praise, always needing to be the best, always needing to be first. I was just an afterthought, someone there to serve as a contrast to make him look even better. I think one of the defining moments of our dynamic happened when we were teenagers. My parents decided to take us out to our old cottage to help plant potatoes. Now, I wasn't a fan of digging in dirt, but when you're a kid, you don't have much of a choice. They told us to plant the potatoes and then enjoy the rest of the day however we wanted. It wasn't a big plot, but it still felt like a marathon when you were that age. I thought, why not make it fair? I suggested to Kirill that we split the field in half. He plants his side and I plant mine. He agreed, which in hindsight should have set off alarms. But I was young and naive, so I got to work. Hours later, I had finished my half. I was exhausted, barely able to stand. That's when Kirill swooped in with a sly grin. "Tell you what," he said, "if you finish my half, I'll give you all the money Mom and Dad left us for fun stuff." Foolishly, I agreed. I was tired, but I pushed through, finishing the entire field. When I was done, I dragged myself to the garden shower, washed off the dirt, and eagerly went inside to collect the promised money and head out with friends. But surprise, surprise, Kirill was nowhere to be found. He strolled back in hours later, reeking of alcohol and with no money in sight. Apparently, he'd gone out drinking with friends instead. The worst part? When our parents came home the next evening, he told them he'd planted all the potatoes himself, while I did nothing but slack off. I tried to defend myself, but they didn't believe me. Kirill, their golden boy, could do no wrong after all. I remember lying awake that night, eyes burning with unshed tears. How could they believe him over me again? It didn't end there. As we grew older, Kirill's tactics became more sophisticated, and my parents' blind faith in him only deepened. He began borrowing money from me whenever he was in a bind, which, let's face it, was all the time. Every time, he'd promise to pay me back, and every time, he didn't. There was one incident I'll never forget. I had just bought my first car, a beat-up little hatchback, but to me, it was everything. It represented my freedom. Kirill, of course, immediately asked to borrow it. I hesitated. I didn't trust him with something so important to me, but the conversation happened in front of our dad. "You're being ridiculous," Dad said, shaking his head. "It's just a car. Let your brother borrow it. Stop acting like a child." Under pressure, I handed over the keys. Kirill returned the car the next day, acting as though nothing had happened. But when I went to drive it, I noticed a massive scratch along the right wing. I confronted him naturally, but he denied everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, not even flinching. Once again, I tried talking to my father. "Kirill scratched my car," I said, almost pleading for some semblance of justice. Dad didn't even blink. Are you sure you didn't do it and just didn't notice? Kirill said it wasn't him, and you know he's not a liar. That was the last time I went to my parents for anything involving Kirill. It was clear that no matter what, they'd never see the truth. I was done trying to get them to see the cracks in their golden son's shiny facade. But the final straw came when our parents bought us an apartment. Kirill and I were supposed to live there together. I wasn't thrilled, but I made the best of it. I threw myself into making the place livable, putting money into repairs and spending my weekends painting, fixing leaks, and installing new light fixtures. Kirill, predictably, didn't lift a finger. Then one day, out of nowhere, he announced to our parents that he had a new girlfriend and that he wanted to live with her in the apartment. And naturally, that meant I had to move out. I asked, very reasonably, if I'd be compensated for the repairs I had done. Kirill acted like I'd slapped him across the face, wide-eyed and innocent. My parents, predictably, took his side. Once again, I was the villain. I moved out, renting a small place of my own. And that was it. I was done. Done with Kirill, done with his lies, done with my parents' willful blindness. We haven't spoken in nearly a year, and to be honest, it's been one of the most peaceful years of my life. The first few weeks after cutting Kirill out were strange. There's something about lifelong manipulation that worms its way into your psyche. Even though I had made the conscious decision to step away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the one in the wrong. Years of being told I was second-rate, a liar, or simply unworthy had left scars that were deeper than I'd realized. But with time, I started to heal. Without Kirill in my life, I finally had space, literal and emotional, to focus on myself. I started therapy, which I should have done years ago, and the sessions helped me unpack the years of manipulation and gaslighting that had left me feeling so small. I began to understand that my worth wasn't tied to how my parents or my brother saw me. I was enough on my own terms. I even reconnected with old friends, the ones I had drifted away from because my life had been so wrapped up in family drama. They welcomed me back without hesitation, and it felt like coming up for air after being underwater for years. But the thing that surprised me most was how much I enjoyed living alone. My apartment became my sanctuary, a place where I could come home at the end of the day and just exist. No more walking on eggshells, no more tense conversations with my brother, no more feeling like I was being suffocated by his constant need to be the center of attention. It was just me, and that was more than enough. But then, like clockwork, my parents came knocking. They started calling more often, leaving long, guilt-trippy voicemails. At first, it was subtle. "We miss you, honey. We wish you and Kirill would talk again. You're brothers. You're supposed to stick together." But as I continued to keep my distance, their tone shifted. They couldn't understand why I was so stubborn or selfish for cutting off Kirill. They refused to acknowledge any of the pain he had caused me, any of the ways he had manipulated and betrayed me over the years. To them, he was still the perfect son, and I was just being difficult. But I was done playing their game. For the first time in my life, I wasn't bending over backward to please them, and it felt liberating. Just when I thought I had seen the last of Kirill, he came back into my life in the most unexpected way. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and I was curled up on the couch enjoying a book when there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was immediately on edge. When I opened the door, there he was, Kirill, standing in front of me, looking sheepish for the first time in his life. I considered slamming the door in his face. I'd rehearsed the moment 1,000 times in my head, the satisfaction of finally standing up for myself, of telling him to get lost. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't seen him in so long. Whatever it was, I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't sit down. didn't even take off his jacket. Instead, he stood awkwardly in the middle of the living room, fidgeting with the keys in his pocket. "I messed up," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I raised an eyebrow. "That's an understatement." He winced. I know I've been, well, a terrible brother. And I know I've hurt you. I came here to apologize." I crossed my arms, leaning back against the doorframe. Why now? Why after all this time? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I lost my job, my girlfriend left me, I'm in a bad place, man. And I started thinking about everything, about us, about how I treated you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say I'm sorry." For a moment, I was stunned. Kirill had never apologized for anything in his life. He had always been the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong. And yet here he was, standing in my living room, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. But I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I appreciate the apology," I said slowly, "but you have to understand. I'm not ready to let you back into my life. You've hurt me too many times, Kirill. I can't just forget everything you've done." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I get it. I do. I needed to try." There was a long silence, and then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. As I stood there watching him leave, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved that he had finally acknowledged his actions. But another part of me was wary. After years of manipulation, could I really trust him? In the days that followed, I thought a lot about Kirill's apology. Was he truly sorry, or was this just another one of his manipulations? Could people like him ever really change? Or was I setting myself up for more disappointment if I let him back in? I talked it over with my therapist, my friends, and even spent some time journaling about it. Slowly, I came to a decision. I wasn't ready to forgive Kirill. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I was ready to take back control of my life. On my terms, not his. I had spent too long being defined by my family's dysfunction, by the constant push and pull of trying to meet their impossible expectations. It was time to focus on myself, and so I sent Kirill a message. It was simple, to the point. I told him that I wasn't ready to forgive him, but that I appreciated his apology. I wished him well and told him that I needed more time. Time to heal, time to figure out who I was without the weight of our family's baggage. He didn't respond, but that was okay. I didn't need him to. For the first time in my life, I was free. Free from the toxic dynamic that had controlled me for so long. Free to live my life on my own terms. And that was more than enough.